of the consulting division. In 2016, he created SPSG Consulting. Carlos is a sports business professor at ISADE Business School, IE Instituto de Empresa, La Liga Business School, and Escuela Universitaria Real Madrid Universidad Europea. Carlos is also a member of the board of the Spanish Marketing Association, coordinator of the sports chapter CEMDE, member of the board RC Deportivo de A Coruña, as well as non-executive advisor at B+. Finally, he is a member of the advisory board of World Football Summit, Sporting Global, OWQLO, and BYS Book Your Stadium. Carlos, welcome to the stage.
Thanks indeed, Christian. I'm not sure why one sec. I'm not sure why I cannot see myself.
I will give you another minute here to try to enable your camera. Carlos, should I ask the other panelists to introduce themselves?
I have already prepared the presentation for them. So anyway, I will switch off and then switch on again. And thanks indeed for taking your time. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everybody. And thanks obviously to SportIn Global for the opportunity, especially to Ole Martin, to Eduardo, and to Christian. And thanks obviously to Jorge, to Rui Alexandre, and to Daniel for your time and for your generosity in sharing your knowledge and your experience and opinions with the audience. So I'm going to introduce one by one. Jorge Schunra is the Vice President of Strategy and also co-owner at Overactive Media. He has studies at BBA at University, as well as some programs, executive programs at Harvard University. Formerly, he used to work at Santander in New York, EY, Ernst & Young, TYBA, and Source. Again, he's currently the Vice President of Strategy and co-owner of Overactive Media, as well as President and co-founder of Mad Lions, and also member of the advisory board at Instituto Hermes. So it's a great pleasure to have you with us, Jorge.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Gracias, Jorge. Rui Alexandre Jesus is a director at WESCO, the World Esports Consortium. He has studies at the sport law at the Université Lusíada de Lisboa, and other studies at Universidade Internacional and Lund University. He formerly used to work at Sporting Club Lisboa, Torres Campo Grande, Associação Nacional de Jogadores Não Profissionais de Futebol, of Council for Sport Law at Rogério Alves Associados, Federação Portuguesa de Desporte Eletrônico as President and General of the General Assembly, and the Portuguese Association for Sports Law. He is the president. Again, he's the director at WESCO, World Esports Consortium. So it's a great pleasure to have you with us, Rui Alexandre Jesus.
My pleasure, Carlos. Thank you. Hello, Jorge. Hello, Daniel. I'm available, so let's go when you want.
Obrigado. And last but not least, Daniel Gamba. Daniel is an Italian-Brazilian executive with 20 years of experience in the sports entertainment industry. Gamba has a degree in international trade from Unisinos, international business management from AIU, and also holds an executive master in management of sports organization from INEF, Universidad de Lleida. For nearly a decade, he was previously responsible for new business development activities for one of the leading sports logistics agencies in the Americas. During that period of time, he was directly responsible for daily relationships with the IOC, FIFA, CONCACAF, CONMEBOL, etc., etc. Over the past decade, Daniel has created consulting agency focusing on opportunities around football, soccer in the North American Latin regions, and more recently has been working very intensively and extensively in the esports, sponsorship, and licensing areas. So it's a great pleasure also, Daniel, to have you on board.
Pleasure's all mine. Thanks for the opportunity. Looking forward to discuss this with you guys. Thanks for
Obrigado and grazie mille for your time, as you are Italian Brazilian. So before starting the the panel, and I'm still trying to fix this, but I don't know how to do it. Anyway, we can start by giving a broad overview of the sports industry from a business perspective. We can use obviously Newzoo data, and so we are talking around between 400 and 500 million audience. 50% of them being avid fan, and around the other half, 50%, casual fan. We are also talking about an industry of about $900 to $1.1 billion industry. Out of them, 60 to 70% coming from sponsorship opportunities, 20% roughly coming from media rights, and between 10 and 15% coming from publisher fees. Having said this, and using as a source both Forbes, Newzoo, CBS, as well as Goldman Sachs, one of the main challenges that the esports industry is facing is basically how to monetize all of this huge audience. We compare, for example, with the NFL. In a yearly basis, an NFL fan spends around $275 per head per annum. An NBA fan spends around $230 per head per annum. Even an MLB baseball fan spends around $100 per head per annum. If we compare this with the esports, the situation is quite dramatic. An esports fan spends between $4 to $5 per head per annum, which means more or less 2% of the amount of expenditure by an NFL fan, $4 to $5 per head per annum. The COVID-19 situation has severely also impacted on the sports industry. It is true, absolutely true, that the audience has increased, has grown, but not necessarily the amount of money that has been generated. So there's an untapped potential over there. If we analyze a little bit the situation in terms of sponsorship, for example, in Spain, and according to the sport sponsorship barometer study undertaken by SPSG Consulting and presented last January 2021, out of the 10 most recognized and connected brands to the esports industry, only 2 of them, Coca-Cola and Red Bull, are non-endemic brands. So there's a huge, space for improvement in terms of endemic brands to be really associated with the esports industry from a sponsorship perspective. I would like just to finalize my initial intervention before opening the debate to the panelists, to Jorge, to Rui Alexandre, and to Daniel, with some specific bullet points in terms of where the esports industry is moving. We are still in an expansion and restructuring process. Esports is not about digital. Esports is about physical and digital at the same time, which is the phygital concept. There's a clear increasing interest from traditional sports bodies, leagues, NBAs, La Liga, F1, etc., into this space. The challenge is how to monetize all this engagement. The importance of esports for destination as well as for public sector, gamification in education training, esports innovation hubs, etc. A big increase in terms of mergers and acquisitions, and here, Jorge, I'm pretty much sure that you can elaborate a little bit more, as well as the presence of investors and funds, such as Overactive Media Group, Harris Blitzer, Crank Sports and Entertainment, etc., etc. The increasing importance of league based on the franchise business model, increase in professionalism, increase in player salary, increase also in terms of the associations, and eventually regulation bodies. And this is a space where both Daniel and Rui Alexandre are really experts, and we are looking forward to listen and learn from you. Increase of audiovisual rights, increase of interest from sponsors, both endemic and non-endemic, and increase in terms of the verticalization strategies as well. So these are more or less the main trends. So I'm going to start with asking you a general question. According to your understanding, what are the main challenges of esports from a business and legal perspective moving forward? Maybe Jorge, and then Rui Alexandre, and then Daniel, if this is fine with you. And meanwhile, I will switch off and then switch on again.
Sounds good. Thanks for that question. So, I think you touched on a very valid point, which is the audiences are growing, but the revenue per fan is still not where it should be, right? And if you really think about esports has existed for some years already, right? There's organizations out there who have been around for 15 years, but really as a business, in the sense of at a scale where you can call it really a business, it's extremely young, right? And most of the attempts at monetizing fans that have been done so far are kind of looking at how does traditional media, not just sports, right? Because I don't think esports is really just sports. It's a mix of all sorts of entertainment, right? But how does traditional media monetize, right? And we've tried to apply those things. The truth is, I believe that we will find ways that are completely different to monetize fans, right? And it's just going to take a bit of time to test those ways and to see, which are the correct ways of doing so. Esports is very different to sports in many ways, but also in the ways that fans enjoy this medium of entertainment, right? They don't go to a stadium regularly to watch the matches, but they do watch them, massively on streams. They don't get, they're not watched on TV where, the way of monetizing is different than where they're watched, which is Twitch and YouTube, etc. They are interconnected with a video game, and we've seen ways of monetizing there, like in the Call of Duty League or the Overwatch League, where there's skins that you can buy in the game that use the branding of the teams, and the teams get a cut of those sales, etc. So there's many ways, potential ways to monetize. I think it's just too early for us to have landed all of those ways. We're still exploring which are the ways that work organically and naturally without annoying the fan and adding value to the fan, which is the most important part.
Daniel, want to go or should I?
No, the floor is yours. Go for it.
Oh, not dance floor, just the floor. I was listening to Jorge. He's in the part of the business challenges and monetization. He's more aware of it than I am. But on that part, I only have a question also for you guys to debate. Do you think that the viewers and this generation that wants to be a part of esports, of gaming, is what I normally call a free access generation? I mean, they are more used to have things freely. The internet, the social media network, it's all almost free for them. Do you think that is a problem to monetization? Because of course there are precious things that they will, as Jorge said, there are many ways of doing it. But I feel that there is always some kind of resistance because they want things more in an open source than paid. That was one of my doubts. Regarding the legal challenge, well, Daniel, I believe, can also talk about it. But in my perspective, there are, in the introduction of Carlos, that is still not with the camera on, but he will be, we hope. But we can see him on the little photo there. I believe that there are two main challenges. The first one, for in the last panel, there was an intervention saying that the whole ecosystem is structured and that people can go in and then people should look for it. In the introduction of Carlos, he said some kind of opposition to that there is still great challenge of structure, the context and the ambience of esports. One, for me, there are mainly two big challenges. First, to create I'm a defender instead of Jorge, but it's different opinions, to approach more esports to the traditional sports context of organization, of structure. And one of the things is to create an appeal, a kind of independent appeal court. Oh, hello, Carlos. Great to see you. A kind of independent appeal court or entity for problems arising on the competitions. Because normally what happens is the player or the coach or the team challenges the organizer, and it's the rules that are established. There are no outside analysis or total independent analysis of it. And that's the main difference regarding sports. The other one is something that Carlos also said, the training process. I mean, the shift between amateur esports and professional esports, mainly regarding young players and coaches and training. It seems that there is no worry on putting that on generally and globally. And I believe that is one of the biggest challenges, because the idea of gaming is the freedom of playing, and putting on too many rules, it seems to be a great resistance on that. For starters, I believe that answered Carlos.
Thank you. As a first starter, that's super great. Daniel, what's your take on this? What are the main challenges of esports from a business perspective so far?
Yeah, no, those are valid points that Jorge and Rui brought it up. It left me with little else to say, but I think there is 2.7 million gamers, according to some statistics, and that definition of gamer, I guess that's the first thing we need to look at, because gamer, as many years ago, were people that were playing video game on consoles. Today, the technology, pretty much put us as a gamer at everybody that has a cell phone, So when you have half of the population of the world, playing games on their cell phones as well, it's an unimaginable amount of people that you can reach through our games. And I think that's the biggest thing for brands there, like even for media companies and entertainment companies, esports, video games in general, they offer like a unique opportunity to reach these demographics that they couldn't reach it before, especially a young generation. And I think that's the biggest challenge. Now the numbers are there. The people that are playing games are there. How you capitalize it and how you monetize it, that's going to be the next challenge. But definitely, audience is there. I seen some researches that this is from a couple of years ago, but I believe that maybe 2 years ago, even before the pandemic, the numbers of audience on broadcasting of video game tournaments or streaming, it was already 5 times bigger than the subscriptions of Netflix. And when you use Netflix as a threshold for the industry, Netflix had a considerable amount of users. So if the demographics for esports broadcasting is 5 times more than that, you can imagine, Twitch was leading the way already, 15 billion minutes, I believe that I read it, that was even more than the audience that CNN, MSNBC, some of these major TV channels generate on a yearly basis, and that's where that's the opportunity there, and brands are realizing that more sooner than some, more often than others. But I think just like betting, I believe regulations is going to be challenging for the industry, because it's a very thin line between esports and competitions. We have just to be careful about it, how we take this approach. But the opportunity is definitely there. Whoever is not taking part of this is definitely missing the boat.
Absolutely. I think that you have mentioned something extremely important. The difference between gaming and esports, more or less like running and athletics, right? The full pyramid is running, and only on the top, the elite are the athletes, and that they go to the Olympics, etc., etc., etc. So, and regarding back to some of the comments on regulations and the legal perspective, and I would like also to know Jorge's point on this. Is there any necessity for the esports industry to be regulated as other sports are, traditional sports are regulated in terms of federations and so forth and so on? Is there a necessity here or not? What's your point? Daniel, maybe you can start, and then Rui, and then Jorge.
No, I think very clearly to me, and just jumping on what you said, you used the analogy of athletics. I tend to use the analogy of soccer to my friends. It's like a video game is when we play with our friends, we're just having fun. And then esports, and when you're taking serious and you're competing, and that's what you're leaving, you're leaving out of that, as a profession. So as any profession, I think you need to have regulations. You have competitions, you have people that you influence based on your performance, and there's people that look after you. So absolutely, you have to have it regulated. It's a very open debate still if you consider esports a traditional sports, and then some of the Olympic committees, I believe the Olympic Committee of Asia, they did some test events on their Asian Games where esports were actually a medal competition. So, if you're having this type of opportunity and people are taking this seriously as a profession, you have to have regulations. So for me, it's a no-brainer.
Thank you. Rui?
Well, I have to agree with Daniel. I just have to say two things regarding that topic. That's always a hot topic on regarding esports. The first one, if the industry doesn't want to be regulated, keep calling themselves competitive gaming only. That's my provocation normally, because if you want to use the word sports, you have to agree on using that word. It's like, it's a sport, and if it's a sport, let's act like one. Well, of course, the world of esport and traditional sports have many things still to get better, to achieve, but there are good things done, and mainly also regarding that topic, the worry is always about the young gamers and the young people. I mean, you can't manage the industry and say, who cares about? Let's put no rules on this, and let's just leave the market running, and the good ones will achieve, and the bad ones will fall. And regarding children and regarding young players, I don't believe it's defendable to ask for a thing like that. Normally, the word regulation scares people a little bit. Why? Because normally they think about limits, they think about imposition, they think about authorities. Newsflash, there can be regulation with all the parties involved, constructed together, with inputs from everywhere, and that's the new part of sports. It will be a new kind of regulation. It will be a different kind of regulation than traditional sport, of course, but it has to be some kind of it. But that's my view on it.
Taken notes. Jorge, what's your call on this?
Yeah, I'm slightly different of an opinion here. We're operating an esports business, and we've had no need or no situation where we said, damn, we wish this was regulated. It's esports, and you were saying, well, it has the word sports. Well, but we call it esports for a reason. That's why we don't call it sports, because it's not the same. If it was the same, we would just call it sports, and playing League of Legends would be like playing football, and it would just be under the sports umbrella. But and it doesn't have to do with things like physicality, because you have sports where no physicality is used, etc. But I think this is more of a like political discussion, probably, where, to me, this is a sector of innovation. And if you look at the nations that have thrived in innovation, it's exactly because they did not regulate any innovation vertical until it became very mature. Because the reason for that is that the issue, if you regulate it initially, is when it's born here, you don't know where it's going. You don't know if it's going to end up in this direction, in that direction, or if it's going to go like that. And then here, we don't know what esports will be in 10 years or in 20 years. So if we regulate it now, what we're doing basically is we're limiting the spectrum of where esports can go. And that's a competitive disadvantage to any country that does that, for sure. Besides that, traditional sports regulation in most countries are, from a business perspective, a big disaster. And that's why, especially in Europe, right? And that's why it's one of the many reasons why the most valuable sports properties, despite, most of them are in North America, despite them being from a impact and audience perspective much smaller than the ones we have here, because it's just much harder to do proper business in sports here in Europe. So I agree that at some point we will need specific esports regulation. And again, esports is as different to traditional sports like Big Brother is. Big Brother is another way of entertainment that is competitive, where people compete for a prize money and so on, and it's entertainment, and it's as different from traditional sports as esports is. And they don't have their own regulation. But I think here, for the reasons that you mentioned, Rui, mainly about minors. I think, do you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I think mainly for the reasons that you mentioned about minors, and for other reasons as well, at some point we will need a separate regulation for esports that has nothing to do with sports, where the current state authorities that have their hands in sports should stay away from it totally, and that time will come. But for now, I don't think we need it. Even in the case of the minors, in most countries, or in all countries where we operate, we are regulated by the same laws as any company. If I own, like in my previous companies that had nothing to do with esports, I couldn't go and hire a 14-year-old. I couldn't go and hire a 16-year-old with the permission of their parents. I can only hire an 18-year-old without their permission. So we actually act by higher standards in defending underage than actually traditional sports organizations under the sports law, which is more permissive actually in that regard.
Thank you, Jorge and Rui and Daniel. This is a really interesting topic with some kind of controversy as well, with different opinions. Let's move to the business perspective and the way to generate money, because as we have mentioned, there's untapped potential out there in terms of how to monetize all of this huge audience and engagement. There are different business models, right? And one of them that is growing and growing in selected parts of the world is the franchise model. And you, Jorge, you are part of your company is one of the main players in this area. How do you see how the esports industry can, from a club, league, etc. perspective, can monetize, and what's the role of franchises model in this scene?
Right. I think the franchising model is it's a superior business model, quite frankly, because you basically have in esports, right? I can't talk about traditional sports because I have no personal experience there, but in esports you have the franchising model where the franchise is yours. It's an asset that you have on your balance sheet that investors know that it's there and it belongs to you. You don't relegate, so you can, you have a certainty in terms of your projections of audiences, of income, etc. That gives you that safe, boundary basically. To your sponsors, you can tell them, look, we can do a long-term sponsorship because I can guarantee you that I'm always going to be here. It's not like Champions League where I don't know if this year I'll be there or next year if I'll be there. And then the most important part is that the value you create for the league, the teams capture it, or a big part of it, right? So media rights deals, sponsorships, ticketing, etc. All of that goes back to the teams. So you're extremely aligned, and it's a business model that is pretty good. The other business model in esports is just playing at tournaments that are owned by others. So, you know, you're building the product for them. They're just really running the event, which, you know, it's a commodity really. And but they're keeping the revenues, right? And the only thing you get is prize money, and that you have to share with the players. So at the end of the day, you're just depending on your own sponsors to make it work. And again, if we take the, you know, the top valuable sports properties worldwide, you know, there's not so much correlation to audiences that they have or fans that they have, because you don't see many of the European teams compared to North American teams in the top 50, right? And that's because this business model is just so superior. And here in esports, it's even more important than in traditional sports, because the industry has been very, you know, in the past, now less, but it has been volatile. Organizations have gone broke, others have come in, etc. And this gives stability. And when there's stability, it's good for everyone. It's good for the teams, it's good for the league, it's good for the publisher, but it's also good for the players, because we're able to sign players more long-term if they want to, and provide them with better salaries if we have more certainty in time and if we make more money. Because at the end of the day, you know, if only the players make money, then after a few years, the industry is gone. But this way we can make them make more money because we all make more money, right?
Thank you. Daniel, if I'm not mistaken, you live in the United States of America, right? And Rui, you live in Europe, right? Where the regulation in terms of franchises and close leagues is completely different. What's your point on this point? What do you think in terms of the franchise business model or any other business model that can actually generate enough revenue to sustain the industry? Daniel, Rui?
I can start then.
Daniel, yes.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, Jorge has a lot of experience on esports, and then he shares some valuable points here, where Rui and I may become more from the sports side of things without the E in front, right? So I look at this, you know, I like it a comment that Steve Bornstein, you know, he made. Steve is the president of Activision, you know, and he was a former CEO of ESPN and NFL Network. A few years ago, he said that esports will eventually rival the biggest traditional sports leagues in terms of future opportunities. And at the time, it was really controversial because what do you mean about this? Well, at the end of the day, we're fighting for people's time, right? Esports is not just another form of entertainment. So what lead people to watch an esports competition versus a traditional sports competition? And you as a sports organization, how do you set up yourself in this middle where you want to entertain actually sports fans, but you cannot miss this opportunity to be involved with esports, which is a trend and a direction that's moving forward, you know? So being involved with a franchise and find, I guess, the clubs, you know, talking from a sports perspective, right? The clubs that have been looking at this opportunity is maybe create a different brand, license their name, and create a different, perhaps, brand that's part of the bigger umbrella from the sports organization. But they have to be involved with sports because they have to be involved with that new audience. You know, they can't just miss this opportunity. So the franchise model for me works. And again, you said a valid point. It's different than here than Europe. But again, there is no, I always like to say there's no secret formula, right? That you follow a certain step and you're going to get a certain result. You as a brand, you as a club, you have to look at your circumstances, the context that you are inserted, and try to adapt to yourself under the resources that you have, under the market that you're staying. It depends what kind of audience that you have. So each club, there's no secret formula to follow steps and the result's going to be the same. You have to look at the situations differently, and you have to adapt that to yourself. But absolutely, you know, you have to be involved. If you're not involved in esports, you're definitely missing an opportunity.
Thank you, Daniel. What's your point, Rui?
I won't add any. Yeah, okay. I won't add any much more than Daniel said. It was almost. I could almost do copy paste of it. But the only add-on I can say is that instead of opinion, here in Portugal and in some other cases in Europe, I've looked at some badly managed franchise of traditional sports clubs with esports teams. But the problem with that, it's not of the esports teams. It's how the traditional clubs manage that franchise. Because most of the traditional sports managers don't understand esports and don't know how to deal with that franchise. And in some cases, they deliver all the process almost to the esports team, and normally they can't catch up with the fan base of the traditional sport. Because my vision on esports is precisely the E on the sport, is to bring all the two base fans together, of the esports teams, of the gamers, and to bring on the traditional sports fan. In some franchises where you put almost the brand almost transforms itself from the sport club to the esports team, you lose a lot of the esports. Just a practical case here in Portugal. A club from a city, from Lisbon, has made a deal of a franchise with a team from the south of Portugal, from Algarve, from the esports teams, right? So the fans of the club didn't identify themselves with it because they are locally, they have local feelings from the team, from the club team. So this kind of things has to be accounted for, and that's my. It's a question of correcting of this, but of course there are good examples, but also still bad examples.
Thank you so much for these examples. Very, very interesting. I'm afraid that we have only 5 minutes, more or less. We have a very interesting question from Pablo Acosta Davila. He says, I understand your point. I'm pretty much sure that he's referring to Rui, but also to Daniel maybe. I understand your point on establishing federations in order to define regulations. But how do you see these organizations working alongside with publishers who are the ones with the real power? Pablo Acosta Davila, thanks for your question. Any comments?
Probably Daniel will say his opinion also. I believe it's a question of time, of years, of things align to people start working together. I always remember regarding that what happened to NBA in the Olympics in the early 90s, 1890s. We all, people from my generation, the NBA, the professional part, NBA always said at one point that they didn't need the Olympics, that they didn't want to allow their players and to connect with that. Things went forward, and now things a little bit normalized. It's an example. Of course, it's not to apply, but it's a way of looking that what I normally let me say this. What I normally, when people speak about publishers, what publishers? The main ones today, or the biggest ones in 2-year times or 4-year time? Because we know that in esports things are so quick on booming that there are publishers that can appear in a 5-year term, new ones, and then they can product also very captivating games, and probably they work more alongside than federation, confederation, consortium, an international entity that could bring all people together. And I don't know if I'm being too optimistic, but that's what I think that could happen.
Thank you, Rui. Daniel, something to add here?
I think I'm personally believe in sports psychology, that I use that a lot with the people I work with. Is just any opportunity is just how you react to it. You know, it's 10% what happens to you, 90% how you react to it. So people are looking at this still and trying to figure it out. Where are the opportunities? Where are the challenges? And you have to take advantage of this. You know, it's just, I think there's more opportunities, more positives out of this than actually challenges. You know, there are always going to be controversial, different opinions based on people's perspectives, but we should continue working towards this direction that's going. Esports are here to stay. that's not going to change. The more and the more younger generation are going to be more and more involved. So we just got to adapt to ourselves and try to do the best of it.
If I can, if I may, I would like to add a point that one of the differentiating points of esports is that there's an IP, intellectual property, attached or in the bone of the activity. Call it esports or sports. Really, I don't care. So you need the IP, you need the software who belongs to a company, Tencent, EA, name whatever. You need a hardware to run this software, and you need telecommunications. These are the three main elements. Without any of them, you cannot, be part of the sports, right? And an IP is something that is backed by investment, correct? And whether you play one game or the other, this is a big difference. Whether you play in a Spalding basketball or Molten basketball, at the end of the day is quite similar. Is a basketball, right? I think that this is a differentiating point to take into consideration in terms of publishers, IPs, monetization, regulations, etc. We have a last question. I think it's for Jorge from Michael Cheung. Could you explain the strategy behind Overactive Media choosing Toronto, Canada, to be the headquarters of your North American esports teams when a majority of the events and teams are in the West Coast and in the USA?
Sure thing. So there's mainly two reasons. One of them is very simple, and it's that the founding team of Overactive Media are Canadian, from Toronto, so that makes it obviously a big reason for that. And also most of our investors are from there. But then also it's turned out to be a very strong strategy, because even though most of the events are in the US and most of those events also most of the, like, the biggest part of the North American market in terms of revenue is the US. In the US, you're competing against just so many other properties and esports organizations. Whereas in Canada, really, like, if you look at the Call of Duty League, we're the only Canadian organization in the Call of Duty League. If you look at the Overwatch League, you also have the Vancouver Titans, yes. But then you don't have anyone in League of Legends, in the LCS. You don't have anyone in Counter-Strike, and those are really the four, and in Valorant, and those are really the five main games that matter. So what this means is that if a brand wants to be in esports in Canada, there's really just one option, right? And yes, it's a smaller market than the US, but you own it fully. So I would rather own a market for myself entirely, rather than have to split it and compete and with a lot of other brands, because it doesn't just impact how much of that part you get, it also impacts your margins, because in order to beat the competition, you might drive your prices of sponsorships down a little, and that impacts your margins. So it's a much better place to be, I believe, but also, of course, if you are successful in the US, that's also a great place to be.
Okay, thank you. Last question. I give you only 45 seconds each. Okay, 45, please. Otherwise, Christian will kill me.
Yep.
Christian, just 45 times 3. Okay. How do you envision by 2030 the esports industry? What are the two main bullet points? Maybe we can start by Daniel.
There's tons of opportunities. An esports team will offer many new possibilities from sponsorship in the world. I think even if it's not going to be regulated, or it's going to be more considered as sports, traditional sports, than ever. Although it might be called esports, that's a controversial thing, but it's definitely going to be there. And I think, again, just to reemphasize what I said earlier, there's definitely there's definitely you got to find a way to be involved with it. You know, no matter what, or a brand, club, or person, you need to be involved with somehow, because that's a tendency here to stay. Did I made it 45 seconds?
Good, excellent. Thank you. You make it. Rui.
Thanks for the question. I'm not very good at forecasting or futurology, but what I sincerely believe is just that esports will be more accepted worldwide, in publicly and by the governments. I believe it will be next year's. Every government, because nowadays there are some that already are looking at it. In a way or another, or in a sports way, or in a youth challenge, or a social education purpose, esports will be much more accepted in the community, in public-wide community, and that it will be good professionally, and for the young generations that will have more opportunities to professionally engage with it.
Okay, thank you. Jorge, last but not least.
Yeah, no, very quick. I think, you know, if I would have to point to two things, I think the first one is that by then we will have found out and we will see a lot of new and different ways to monetize esports that are not currently here today, that we're not seeing in other entertainment industries. So I think that's where a lot of value will be created. And then in terms of size, I don't dare to do an estimate. We're growing double-digit year on year, and I think we will continue doing that, and I think we will be challenging the main sports head-to-head. We're already doing so in the range of 18 to 30, I think it is. The LEC is the second most watched sport in Europe, or sport league in Europe, after the Champions League. So I think that will continue, but I don't dare to say how big it will be.
Thanks so much indeed also, Jorge. I wish also, not in terms of audience, but at some point, and also at some extent, also in terms of monetization. So doubling at least the $4 to $5 per head per annum to at least $10, which would be a good step forward. There's also a question from Anders Christensen that we don't have time. I'm sorry, Andersen, in terms of verticalization, which is, as for me, one of the main aspects to deal with and to tackle. So again, thanks, Jorge, for sharing your comments and your vision in terms of the esports moving forward. Gracias.